Have you ever set an intention clearly, done everything you were taught, affirmed, visualized, written it down, and still found yourself staring at your life, waiting for something to change? And the longer time passed, the louder that inner voice grew, saying maybe it wasn't meant for you, maybe you were doing something wrong, maybe manifestation worked for everyone except you. That feeling is familiar to almost every human being who has ever ventured into this field, and it comes from a single misunderstanding, a misunderstanding nobody told you about, because most people who talk about manifestation don't know it either. Manifestation is not slow. It never was. What happens is that you were taught to look for the result in the wrong place, at the wrong time, in the wrong way. Itzhak Bentov, engineer, researcher, and one of the greatest explorers of human consciousness, described with unsettling precision what actually happens between an intention and its result. And what he discovered goes against everything the manifestation market sells. In this video, you're going to understand why manifestation is already happening, even if you can't see it yet. You'll understand what the bridge of incidence is, how it forms, and why your only real function in this process is not to force, affirm more, or visualize with greater perfection. And when you truly understand this, not as a concept, but as something that resonates within you, your relationship with time, with waiting, and with the process of manifesting itself will never be the same. Itzhak Bentov, one of the most profound researchers into the nature of consciousness and reality, spent much of his life investigating what happens behind the scenes of human experience. And one of the most unsettling, and at the same time most liberating, conclusions he reached is that the reality you live does not begin the moment something appears in front of you. It begins long before that, at a level your physical eyes simply cannot access. Manifestation, at its most fundamental level, is always instantaneous. Not because your desire materializes the moment you think about it. That would be too shallow a reading of an extraordinarily sophisticated process. It is instantaneous because the very moment you define an intention with real clarity, something begins to move. Not tomorrow, not in a little while. Now. A chain of events begins to be orchestrated behind the scenes of your reality, connecting where you are today to where you want to be. That movement is real, even if you can't see it yet. The problem is that most people measure manifestation by what they can see, touch, or prove. And there lies the mistake, because physical reality is the final stage of a process that has already happened at much subtler levels. When someone plants a seed and sees nothing sprouting the next day, it doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means the process is running at a level that isn't visible yet. The root forms before the flower appears. It has always been this way. Manifestation follows the same logic, only at an even deeper level. Bentov said that consciousness does not operate within the same restrictions of time and space that the physical body experiences, and that has an enormous practical implication. The result you desire already exists as an organized reality. What is still happening is the alignment between your current reality and that new configuration. That alignment has steps, it has stages, it has a bridge being built, brick by brick, event by event, in a way the conscious mind can rarely follow or predict. And it is precisely that bridge, that invisible structure connecting the point where you are now to the point where your desire becomes physical reality, that changes everything you believe about time, effort, and control in the process of manifesting. Because understanding how that bridge works is not just a theoretical shift in perspective. It is a shift that completely transforms what you do and what you stop doing from the moment an intention is created. Before going deeper into that invisible structure, it's worth pausing for a second to question something most people never genuinely question. What does it actually mean to manifest something? Because depending on how you answer that question, you'll understand why some people get results, while others spend years practicing techniques without moving forward. There is a definition that simplifies everything, and not in a superficial way, but in a surgical one. Manifestation has two components. The first is defining an intention. The second is allowing the universe to deliver it in the most logical and efficient way possible. It sounds simple, and it is, but the depth of that simplicity is what most people can't sustain in practice. The first component can happen in many ways. It can be a thought, an affirmation spoken out loud, a visualization, something written in a journal, a vision board pinned to the bedroom wall. All of these are valid tools, but none of them is what actually activates the process. They are vehicles. What matters is not the vehicle, but what happens inside you the moment you use one of them. Because there is an enormous difference between mechanically repeating an affirmation and the moment something inside you decides, with real conviction, that it is true. There is a difference between visualizing a result and the instant in which you, somehow, internally claim that result as yours. That instant, that internal click, is where manifestation begins. Not the ritual, not the perfect technique, it's the decision. And decision, in the deepest sense of the word, is not an intellectual act. It is a state. It is the moment your consciousness stops treating something as a possibility and starts treating it as reality. Bentov describes this in a way that resonates deeply. Consciousness doesn't just observe reality. It actively participates in its construction. And that participation begins with the internal state, not the external action. The second component, allowing the universe to deliver, is where most people stumble, because allowing requires something that goes completely against modern human conditioning. It requires you to let go of control over the how. It is not passivity. It is not crossing your arms and waiting for things to fall from the sky. It is an active posture of trust, continuing to live, make decisions, move through the world, but without trying to micromanage every step of the process that has already been set in motion. The conscious mind is brilliant at many things, but it works with limited information. It can only see what it already knows, what it has already experienced, what it can already project based on the past, and that is why it can rarely map the best path between where you are and where you want to be. The universe, or your higher consciousness, as Bentov preferred to call it, operates with a much wider view. It sees connections the conscious mind would never suspect. It can orchestrate meetings, circumstances, and timing in a way no human planning could replicate. So the real function of someone who is manifesting is not to find the path. It is to define the destination with clarity and then have the maturity to trust that the path will appear. Not all at once, not obviously, but step by step, in a way that will only make sense in retrospect. And what makes that path possible has a name, a structure, and a logic of its own that goes beyond what most people have been taught to believe about how reality works. Bentov was not the type of person who talked about spirituality in vague terms, using beautiful words that sound good but explain nothing. He was an engineer, inventor, researcher, someone who needed to understand the mechanisms behind things. And it was exactly that combination of scientific rigor and spiritual depth that led him to coin one of the most precise concepts ever created to describe what happens between an intention and its result: the bridge of incidents. The bridge of incidents is the chain of events that connects your current reality, point A, where you are now, to the result you desire, point B, where you want to be. It is not a poetic metaphor. It is a functional description of something that genuinely operates within the structure of reality. This chain begins to form the moment an intention is defined, and it is composed of events that, seen in isolation, may appear completely unrelated to what you desire. But seen together, they form a perfectly orchestrated sequence. What makes this concept so powerful is that it appears in virtually every spiritual and philosophical knowledge system in the world, under different names, but describing the same phenomenon. Some traditions call it synchronicity, a term Jung popularized to describe coincidences that carry a meaning beyond chance. Others call it orchestration, unexpected channels, external intention. Vadim Zeland's reality transurfing describes something very similar when it speaks of the space of variations and the threads connecting possibilities. Different vocabularies, different cultures, different eras, but all pointing to the same invisible structure that operates behind the events of human life. And what all these systems agree on is that this structure cannot be forced by the conscious mind. It forms naturally from the moment the intention is clear enough to create a direction. Think of how a stream of water finds its way to the sea. It doesn't plan each curve, doesn't calculate each obstacle in advance. It follows the topography of the terrain, going around what needs to be gone around, accelerating where there is space, slowing where there is resistance, but always moving toward the final destination. The bridge of incidents works in a similar way, except the terrain is made of people, conversations, opportunities, circumstances, and moments that seem to arise out of nowhere. The central point Bentov wanted people to understand is that once this bridge is formed, Manifestation stops being a possibility and becomes an inevitability. Not in the sense that you don't need to do anything, but in the sense that the result is already guaranteed by the alignment that has been created. What remains is to cross the bridge, one step at a time, without needing to see the entire structure at once, without needing to understand how each event connects to the next. The bridge is already there. What most people don't know is that they are already walking on it, and that each seemingly ordinary step they take in their daily lives may be exactly the step that keeps them moving toward what they desire. This completely changes the relationship a person has with the everyday events of their life. That unexpected conversation, that invitation you almost declined, that delay that seemed like an inconvenience, none of it is random within an active bridge of incidents. Everything is part of a sequence being built with a precision that goes beyond the capacity of any human mind to plan. And the clearest proof of this is not found in theories. It is found in the stories of people who have lived this process firsthand. There is a word most people never associate with manifestation, but that may be the most important word in this entire process. Inevitability. Not hope. Not possibility. Not probability. Inevitability. And understanding why this concept sits at the center of everything completely transforms how you experience the time between intention and result. Manifestation is instantaneous, not because the result appears immediately, but because the inevitability sets in immediately. The moment the bridge of incidents forms, there is only one path forward. Not 10 possible paths, not an open fork of probabilities. One path, already laid out, already in motion, connecting where you are to what you desired. The result is guaranteed not by magic, not by blind faith, but by the structure that was created the moment the intention was defined with sufficient clarity. Bentov used an analogy that illustrates this very directly. Crossing a physical bridge. You are on side A, you want to reach side B, and the bridge is already built. What do? You walk, one step at a time. You don't need to see side B to know it's there. You don't need to understand the engineering of the bridge to trust that it will hold you. You don't need to calculate how many steps you'll take before you arrive. You simply walk, and side B naturally draws closer with every step taken. The problem is that most people stop in the middle of the bridge. They look down, see the abyss, and begin to question whether the bridge is real. They start asking, how much longer? Am I on the right track? Did I do something to interrupt the process? And that questioning is not just uncomfortable. It is the only real obstacle standing between you and the result you desire. Because the bridge is already there. You are already on it. What interrupts the progress is not a flaw in the process. It is your attention being pulled away from the next step and redirected toward doubt about the destination. Inevitability, when you truly grasp and internalize it, produces a very specific internal state. It is not euphoria. It is not anxious excitement. It is a deep calm, the kind of calm that comes from knowing something is already resolved even before you can see the resolution. It is the state of someone who has booked a trip, packed their bags, and is quietly waiting for the day to board. There is no desperation, no doubt about whether the plane will depart. The ticket is bought, the process is underway, and the only role that remains is to be ready to board when the moment comes. And it is precisely that internal state, that quiet confidence in inevitability, that allows the bridge of incidents to keep building without interference. Because every time you spiral into panic, doubt, or obsession over the outcome, you are essentially trying to take control of a process that operates at a level far beyond your conscious mind. And what happens to any complex system when you try to control every variable from the outside? It stalls. It loses efficiency. It begins producing results smaller than it would have produced if you had trusted its own functioning. What comes next is not theory. It is the practical, lived demonstration of how that inevitability shows up in real life, in a sequence of events that no conscious mind could have planned, yet that fit together with unsettling precision. Theory without experience is just pretty vocabulary, and Bentov knew that better than anyone. He never separated abstract knowledge from concrete evidence. So before continuing to deepen the mechanics of this process, it is worth looking at a real story that illustrates with near unsettling clarity how the bridge of incidents operates in the everyday life of an ordinary person with ordinary desires, without any elaborate ritual, without any special technique. A woman wanted to find an energy healer, It wasn't a desperate search. It wasn't an urgent need. It was a genuine desire, a clear wish to connect with someone who worked with that kind of healing. She researched a little, looked at some options, and then, as most people do, set the matter aside. Not because she gave up, but because life continued. Other responsibilities arose, and the desire was deposited somewhere inside her without a set date for resolution. A few days later, she received an invitation to a sound bath, a guided meditation session with sound immersion, something she was already familiar with but hadn't planned for that week. For a reason she couldn't rationally explain, she went. During the session, due to a logistical matter with the space, she was moved to a second session that hadn't originally been scheduled for her. A practical circumstance with no apparent special significance. Inside that second session, there was only one other person present. The two began talking afterward, and this is where the story begins to show its real texture, because the woman was introverted, the type who normally thanks the facilitator and leaves without engaging in long conversations with strangers. But something about that afternoon led her to accept an invitation for coffee. A small, seemingly trivial decision that slightly contradicted her usual pattern. And over that coffee, she discovered that the other woman was part of an entire community of energy healers. Exactly what she had desired to find weeks earlier, with no idea of how it could ever happen. No single step in that sequence looks extraordinary. An invitation to an event, a room change, a conversation, a coffee. These are events from anyone's normal life. But the sequence, the way each one connected to the next, with a precision that only became visible in retrospect, is the exact signature of the bridge of incidents in operation. Each event was a stepping stone, and the woman crossed each one not because she was following a plan, but because she was present, open, and willing to act on the small impulses that arose naturally. What makes this story important is not that it is extraordinary, it is that it is common. This kind of sequence happens all the time in people's lives, but most people don't recognize it because they don't know what they're looking at. They see coincidence where there is coordination. They see luck where there is alignment. And they arrive at the conclusion that manifestation didn't work, when in reality it worked exactly as it should, just through a path the conscious mind would never have chosen. And that raises a question that makes many people uncomfortable, but that needs to be faced with honesty. If the bridge forms on its own, and the events happen in a seemingly natural way, what exactly is your role in all of this? What should you actually be doing, and what should you stop doing, while the bridge is being built? This is the part where most people get lost. Not because the concept is complicated, but because the answer goes against everything the modern world teaches about productivity, control, and results. The world says, plan, monitor, optimize, push. And so the person arrives in the field of manifestation carrying that same manual and tries to apply the same set of tools to a process that operates by an entirely different logic. The question that naturally arises after understanding the bridge of incidents is, but what do I do while I wait? And there already lies the first problem, because the word wait already carries a passive posture that is not what is being proposed here. Action is still necessary. Movement is still necessary. What changes is the quality and the source of that action. Because there is a fundamental difference between acting out of fear that nothing will happen if you don't force it, and acting from a genuine impulse that arises naturally from within, without excessive effort. Bentov described this second type of action as something that flows, not because it is easy in the sense of requiring no energy, but because it has no internal resistance. It is the action you take without having to convince yourself that you should take it. It is the book you pick up without knowing why, the message you send without a specific reason, the different route you take on an afternoon for no apparent reason, actions that, seen from the outside, look random, but that, within the logic of the bridge of incidents, are exactly the steps that needed to happen at that moment. The problem begins when the conscious mind enters compulsive analysis mode, and it enters that mode because it was trained to. It starts asking, is this the right action? Am I sabotaging the process with some limiting belief I haven't identified yet? Did I miss the timing? Should I be doing more? These questions seem responsible, seem like the kind of self-reflection a serious person should be doing. But in practice, they are what creates the only real obstacle that exists within this process. Because overthinking is not neutrality, it is interference. Every time the conscious mind tries to map the entire path of the bridge before taking the next step, it is essentially trying to replace an intelligence that operates with far more information than it has access to. It is like a passenger who decides to jump into the driver's seat in the middle of a dark road, convinced they can steer better than the driver who knows every curve of the route. The result is not more control. It is more chaos. Inspired action rarely arrives with fanfare. It rarely feels like the great decisive step that will change everything. Most of the time it arrives disguised as something small, ordinary, even irrelevant. And that is precisely why so many people ignore it. Because they are waiting for an obvious sign, an opportunity that clearly connects to the desire. A move that makes immediate sense to the conscious mind. And while they wait for that grand signal, they ignore the small impulses that are the bridge being built right under their own feet. The sign that you are aligned with the process is rarely a feeling of absolute certainty about the next step. Most of the time, it is simply the absence of obsession. It is the state in which you desired, you defined, and you return to living, without constantly checking whether the result is on its way, without monitoring every event for confirmation. And that state, which looks passive from the outside, is actually the most fertile environment the bridge of incidents needs to complete itself. If you take everything said so far and distill it into a single practical point, that point is presence. Not as an abstract spiritual concept, not as a practice reserved for those with spare time, but as a way of functioning in the world, moment to moment, within the life you already have. Bentov observed that human consciousness is rarely where the body is. The body always exists in the present. But the mind travels. It goes to the future, calculating how the desire will arrive, or returns to the past looking for evidence that things don't work. And in that constant traveling, it leaves the present almost entirely uninhabited. The problem is that the bridge of incidents only operates now. The next stepping stone of your manifestation is not waiting at some distant point. It is approaching your present moment, and it only becomes accessible when you are present enough to recognize it. Obsession with the result signals to your own consciousness that the result is not yet real, not yet guaranteed, and that signal directly contradicts the original intention. Letting go of the result doesn't mean stopping wanting it. It means trusting the process enough to live fully while it unfolds. The bridge is already being built. The question is, will you trust it, or will you keep trying to control every step of the way? Everything presented here only has value if you apply it. Not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, now. Define your intention, let go of the how, and return to living. What is keeping you from trusting the process? Think about that and leave it in the comments, because this conversation doesn't end here. If this content resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There is a lot more on the way.